everyone, and welcome to Spirit Basics, the show for the beginner and the avid connoisseur of fine liqueur. I'm Jennifer Allan.
And I'm Stephen Olson. On today's episode, we're going to introduce you to the history behind alcohol spirits and actually even take a look at just how some of them are made.
But first off, let's start off with the word alcohol. Where does it come from?
Well, first of all, understand that distilled spirits that we'll be talking about on this show actually start as either beer or wine. But the very word alcohol is actually an Islamic word, an Arabic word, that means makeup, believe it or not. The women of the time, and today, of course, used eye makeup to shroud themselves so that they couldn't be seen. Now, this alcohol that they made in those days was also used for medicinal purposes, for religious ceremony, topically as an application for sores and wounds and so forth. Soldiers would use it before going into battle for fortitude. Sailors before they go on a long journey or to carry on a long journey for sustenance. Because in the early times, we needed an excuse to drink, whereas today, we just drink because we like to.
Now, how did the process of distillation begin?
Well, the Moors actually brought distillation into Western Europe, and they started in Spain in the 700s. Now, you may have heard that distillation began in Western Europe in the 1100s. That's when we saw it get into France, into Armagnac, later in Cognac. We also saw it maybe a little earlier than that even in Ireland and in Scotland in the British Isles. Interestingly enough, recently a still was discovered in China. So we do know that distillation in Eastern civilization predates Western civilization by at least 1,000 years.
And when did the process actually find its way over to the New World?
Well, it began originally with tequila, believe it or not. Well, mezcal. In Mexico, our indigenous spirit, the Native Americans were brewing pulque from the agave plant, and the Spanish brought stills over to perfect that process, if you will. And as you probably know, the Spanish also brought sugarcane to the Caribbean. Of course, the stills were soon to follow. Now, the original settlers in the United States and in Canada brought with them whiskey from the British Isles. Rye whiskey was the first. And from there, New England rum was our spirit of choice. And of course, the Boston Tea Party, as you probably know, wasn't a tea party. It was a rum party. It was all about taxes and politics, but that's another story for another time.
Yeah, and for more on the relationship between politics and alcohol, we turn now to our master mixologist, King Cocktail, Dale Degroff.
Jennifer and Steve have told us a lot about the early days of distillation, grain like gin and vodka and whiskey being some of the first distilled products. And they've told us a lot about those primitive attempts at distillation. I want to talk a little bit about the politics of the whole thing, because from the very beginning, from earliest Tsarist Russia when they made vodka, from the first time they made gin under the crown in London, there was always an involvement by the state, because they realized very early there was a lot of money in this stuff. And they started exploiting, taxing, and controlling spirits from the very beginning. The first vodka ever sold in Russia was sold in Tsarist-owned taverns. And the Tsar was very clever. He used vodka as a form of patronage to keep his powerful nobles close to him by giving them the right to produce it and make the money from it. It was the reason why during the Russian Revolution vodka was outlawed, because the people saw it as a way of subjugating the populace, the masses. Of course, it's legal again now. But throughout history, through the gin wars and the gin acts of under the crown, when they would alternately control it and then tax it and then release the taxation, and just cyclical kind of environment until we got to the United States, where we had some emerging spirits of our own. For example, pisco brandy from the Viceroyalty of Peru, tequila from Mexico, and most powerful and most important, rum from the Caribbean and South America. Because it was rum, the motor of our colonial economy, that really might even have been responsible for the fact that we even have a country today. It was the English trying to control and tax the production of rum in New England that pushed us over the brink, made us form the Continental Congress and then the Continental Army, and fight the British in the Revolutionary War to have the freedom to produce and do business on our own, and rum was our big business during colonial times. It was the attempts by our own new young government under Alexander Hamilton as the first Secretary of Treasury to tax these poor guys who were making whiskey and rum, to pay the French back for the Revolutionary War that set these poor guys off for the Whiskey Rebellion of 1793. Not a big rebellion, but George Washington sent in the Continental Army. and he put down this rebellion, and those hard-headed Scotsmen and Irishmen who were living out there in Pennsylvania making rye whiskey, they left. They went to the new frontier. They went to Tennessee, they went to Kentucky, they went to Indiana, they went to Illinois, over the Appalachians, over the Continental Divide, and they carved out a new life for themselves in the wilderness out there, doing what they did best, of course, using the indigenous corn to make spirits. And I'm not going to go any further because that leads us to the evolution of the cocktail and the cocktail bar, but we'll talk about that next time. Cheers, Stephen, Jennifer.
Thanks, Dale. Well, Stephen, we sure can see that alcohol, or rather the lack of it, can cause quite the reaction.
Yeah, we have a lot more freedom than we used to, I think. But we'll talk about that a lot more in future episodes.
But up first, we'll take a look at how some spirits are made.
And our spirit insiders, Morgen and Scott Henuset, are going to take an alternative look at spirit alcohol. That's when Spirit Basics returns.
Welcome back to Spirit Basics. It's time now to turn our attention to how some spirits are made, or should I say distilled?
You should say distilled, but remember, as I alluded to earlier, all spirits start their life as either beer or wine. We need alcohol first, so the fermentation process is the beginning. Then we take this fermented beverage with low alcohol, and we put it in what we call a still, and we cook it. We literally cook this stuff, and what comes out the other side of the still is higher proof alcohol, or what we call spirit. Think of it like making a sauce. You reduce the liquid content and increase the alcohol content. Something like that.
It sounds like we're actually in a kitchen. So how many ways are there of cooking this alcohol?
You know, it's actually quite a bit like a kitchen. We even call it the pot still. The pot still is what we called the alembic still earlier. That's what the Moors brought to us. And to this day, centuries later, we still use that still. But understand that that still is a little less efficient. It traps congeners and aromatics, flavors, smells, if you will, that give a product its indigenous quality. So tequila, single malt scotch, cognac still use it, and several other spirits do too. But many spirits today use what we call the continuous still, or the patent still, or the coffee still. Now, Aeneas Coffey invented this in Ireland back in the 1820s, and then he was thrown out of Ireland, but the Scots embraced him, and we began to learn in the UK about neutral grain spirits, which were smoother and cleaner. So we use it today in vodka and gin.
Well, let's get even more technical. Our spirit guide joins us now for even more detailed look at the distillation process.
The process of distillation is very simple. It's simply this. Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Alcohol boils at a lower temperature, about 176. So, if I take my beer or my wine, something that has alcohol in it, and I boil it, but not all the way up to 212, I'll vaporize only the alcohol, leaving behind the water. Now I can recondense that alcohol back into a liquid. It's much more concentrated this time. So the old stills, whether you want to call them alembic or pot stills or whatever, the whole idea was boil at the right temperature that I can get most of the alcohol to come over here in the form of vapor, condense back into a liquid. If I'm going to make something that's nearly pure alcohol, what we today would call neutral grain spirit, if we made it from grain, or neutral grape spirit, if we made it from a wine, I would need about a week in one of these pot stills, one of these old alembic stills. In one of the new continuous stills, by new I mean invented back in the mid-19th century, I can get it done in 12 hours. How does that work? The continuous still is a series of chambers. Each chamber is like a little baby pot still. So now I can create a continuous distillation, one chamber to the next, to the next, to the next, on and onwards. But one thing is critical in this. I must cut the heads and the tails. The heads are the first stuff that comes off, the tails are the last stuff that comes out. These have methanol, they're bad for you, these just smell bad. A good distiller is going to cut those out and keep the heart. That's how you make good distillate.
Well, that's just a brief overview at the history and the process of distilled spirits. In every upcoming episode, we're going to examine a new category, everything from cognac to tequila.
From vodka to single malt scotch.
And the cocktails that are made from all those spirits.
But up first, our roving spirit insiders, Scott and Morgan, take a trip to the Rocky Mountain Wine and Food Festival for an insider's look at the spirit world.
Thanks, Jennifer and Stephen. We're here at the Rocky Mountain Food and Wine Festival.
And you know what, guys? There's a lot more going on here than just food and wine. Morgan, you ready to explore?
Let's go.
Let's go. So we're down here at the Rocky Mountain Wine and Food Festival, and you're pouring a whole bunch of scotches. Do people drink this stuff?
Oh yeah, a lot of people do.
Okay, now I'm not a big scotch guy. When I drink it, it makes me quiver. You know, what should a guy like me do so that I can enjoy a scotch?
Start out drinking a Lowland that has less peat in it. Actually, our Lowland has no peat in the process, so that makes it a little bit smoother, a little bit easier to drink and to acquire the taste, and then work your way up the Highlands and then eventually into the Islas, and hopefully you can acquire a taste for that.
Why aren't the women drinking scotch tonight?
I'm not a big scotch drinker either. If I like to try anything, it's the cognac. And what we usually do is take a little tour around when we first get here and figure out all the most expensive stuff in the place that you might not ever buy a whole bottle of it and just go pay the big buck tickets and try the best stuff in the place.
I'll stick with you, ladies.
Okay, so we're here at the Amarula booth, and I got to start off by saying, what exactly is Amarula and what category does it fall into?
Amarula is made from the marula fruit. It's an indigenous plant or tree from southern Africa, and it falls into the cream liqueur category.
I see a big, huge elephant right on the front of the Amarula. What does an elephant have to do with a cream liqueur?
Well, they're both indigenous to that part of Africa, and the elephant, they actually eat the fruit. It's a great digestive for them, so they pick up the vitamin C.
So really, you saw the elephants drinking and eating all of this, so you thought, you know what, humans should do it too.
That was a good idea, and it's working.
They got good memories, so does this help their memories?
It hasn't helped mine, but yeah.
What are you guys stirring up down here?
We got some of the new Malibu flavors here. We have the mango and the new pineapple here, which is actually extremely good. You mix it with the Sprite or the pineapple and splash with the cranberry. It makes it a really good drink for the summer.
Now, which is the most popular?
Right now, the mango and the pineapple have been going pretty good head-to-head, but I think the mango's still a bit up there on that one.
Wow, you know what, Morgan? That was like a sensory overload in there tonight.
I know, I learned so much about scotch this evening.
What was your favorite thing?
I'd have to say the Malibu mango was definitely my favorite.
Well, mine was definitely the margarita, and that's it from us. Back to you guys.
Thanks, guys. And Scott and Morgan will be with us every week with one of these wild adventures.
But up first, we continue our look into the spirit world with a lesson on how to drink and make your favorite cocktail. It's all coming up when Spirit Basics returns.
Spirit Basics is brought to you in part by Willow Park Wines and Spirits.
Welcome back to Spirit Basics, the show for everyone who wants to learn more about your favorite cocktails.
And I'd have to say, I think it's high time we started talking about how to drink some of these beverages. Okay. I think there are more ways to drink spirits than there are spirits themselves.
And I think at one time or another, we've all been in a bar, and I think at one time or another, we've all had a shot of that tequila with the salt and the lime.
Yeah, probably.
Are there more rituals of that kind around?
There's so many rituals, but let's start where it all began. In the beginning, in Middle Eastern Europe, for example, water was not potable, and we would drink beer or wine because it was safe. And the beginning of distilled spirits was putting them into the water to purify the water. Now that goes to a religious ceremony, and then from there we're talking about cocktails. And the original cocktails were to enhance the intrinsic quality of the spirit and soften the rough edges. So as the cocktail was created in North America, and the tavern was the place where you could gather for the best food, the best drink, the warm place, then Prohibition comes, and it forced us all to drink in our homes again.
And speaking of gatherings, we turn now to our spirit advisor for a look on how to throw a cocktail party in your own home.
Martini. That's what I like to have at a cocktail party. I mean, I at least have one, because to me, a martini's like flicking on a switch. I mean, it really is exactly the way I like to announce to myself and maybe the rest of the party that I'm here, I'm ready to have some fun. Now, I'm gonna move on after this, because for me, one martini, that's fine. It's a pretty potent drink, and I'm ready to move on to drinks that are a little milder, a little gentler. And I really think that's a critical issue when you're talking about throwing any cocktail party. You need to make sure that you've got drinks of all potencies. In other words, don't assume that everybody wants to have a martini because you like to have martinis. I don't think that's a good way to think of things, but there's another way to look at it as well, and that is anytime you're drinking alcohol, you need to be consuming food, quite frankly. And before you get all worked up about which food it is, I'd simply offer this suggestion. Salted peanuts, pretzels, those are not food substances, okay? Those are nice things to have on the side, but we're talking food. You need to have real food there because people need to put food in their bellies if they're having alcohol. And frankly, that's why alcohol was invented. It was invented to give you nourishment. It was invented to accompany food, to make the food taste better, to make the alcohol taste better. The two go together, and that's the way it's supposed to work. So have some fun with the food. Have something interesting there, but certainly something that can fill people up. And make sure that you've got non-alcoholic drinks for people who don't want to drink, or people even like me, who after one martini, I think it's time to take a break, and I'll probably move on to something non-alcoholic for a few minutes.
Well, now it's time to take a look at how to make some cocktails.
And for that, we're turning to our very own master mixologist, King Cocktail, Dale Degroff, the man actually responsible for the rebirth of the classic cocktail. And here to make a classic cocktail from a classic spirit, whiskey, is Mr. Dale Degroff.
Over the course of this series, I'm going to be making a lot of great cocktails for you. And in order to make great cocktails, we have to learn how to use the tools. And I'm pointing at this tool right here because it is like the chef's knife of the bartender. It's called a Boston shaker. A metal part which fits over a glass part, which makes this beautiful seal. Isn't that magical? Then we break the seal and we build our ingredients right in here. In tandem with that, we have two strainers, a hawthorn strainer with a spring on it and a julep strainer with holes in it. They fit uniquely. Not so good that way, but perfectly this way. I'm going to make a port whiskey punch for you, a 19th century whiskey drink, and they were very adventuresome with their whiskey drinks in the 19th century. The whiskey is the first ingredient, and I'm going to use about 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice as my next ingredient. My trusty juicer here. Please use fresh ingredients. You really must. Fresh juices only. My sour ingredient should be doubled up. If you use 3/4 of your sour ingredient, you must use about 1 part of your sweet ingredient. In this case, that's going to be simple syrup. What is simple syrup? Let me show you. It's called simple syrup for a reason. That's sugar. This is water. Equal parts by volume of sugar and water. If you had a cork bottle, you'd put it in there and shake it up. I can stir it up. As soon as the sugar dissolves, you'll end up with simple syrup. That's why they call it simple. This is basically a whiskey sour at this point. I'm going to shake it up with ice to chill it. I'm going to prepare my glass. By the way, I'm putting separate ice in my serving glass. I would never dump the ice that's in that shaker into my serving glass because that ice is melted already, and I don't want to use it again. I want fresh ice. Make my seal. Shake with the glass on top. Shake real hard to a 10 count. The harder you shake it, the better this drink is going to taste, I promise you. There was a great bartender at the Savoy Hotel in London who said, you drink a drink quickly while it's laughing at you. What he meant was, while it's all foamy, effervescent, and beautiful, look at that, isn't that lovely? But this is not the end. Remember, we called this the port whiskey punch? Here's the piece de resistance. The pour it on top, isn't that beautiful? Just let it fall down in by itself, it'll be perfect. These techniques, these recipes are going to be in the Craft of the Cocktail. You can find them there. Let's do a little bit of the same fruits that we used, the orange and the lemon. And isn't that beautiful? Steve? Jennifer? I'm going to taste it and find out how it tastes here. Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. What we got here is port, by the way, which is a fortified wine, blending with a whiskey sour, bringing a little sweetness and a little roundness to it. It's lovely. Over to you, Steve and Jennifer.
Thanks, Dale. Good job.
Yeah, he's amazing. There's no question about it. You notice that he tasted the cocktail before he served it? That's actually part of the craft of the cocktail. Like being a chef, is actually tasting your recipe before you give it to the guest to make sure it's perfect. And of course, in Dale's case, his recipes are always perfect.
Always perfect.
Always.
Good to know. Well, up next, we take a look at cooking with spirits. That's when Spirit Basics returns. everyone, and welcome back to Spirit Basics. As you can see, we're in the kitchen and we're joined by Chef Allan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jennifer. I'm really looking forward to this journey we're going to take together through the world of spirits.
Now tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been teaching cooking for about 10 years, and I love to travel all over the world and learn about new dishes. And so I tell you right now, we're going to do a lot of traveling around the world together.
I understand that a lot of chefs use spirits in their recipes. Can you tell us why they might do that?
Well, there's no doubt that if you went into any working kitchen, you're going to see exactly what we see here. A chef's secret weapon, a little arsenal of things beside them, and you know why we're going to use them.
I think it's to add a little bit of flavor.
Absolutely. There's nothing better at bringing in flavors or bringing up flavors or adding flavors to food than cooking with spirits.
Now, for all of us at home that want to attempt to use some spirits in our recipes, how do we know what to pair them with?
Well, as we heard in the show, some of these beverages really go well with certain things. So, for example, vodka goes well with tomatoes or clamato or lemon. Rum goes good with citrus. And the same kind of rules will apply when you're cooking. You want to sort of match sort of fruity flavors with things or salty flavors with other things. And we're going to do an awful lot of that as well.
Well, I see we have a couple examples here. I see we have chicken and we have some ribs here. And are those apples?
Yeah, and then we're using a beautiful Spanish brandy, Calvados, which is apple brandy. And throughout the show, we're going to use things like chicken and pork and seafood because they're really, really good palettes to use to cook with in terms of some of the flavors. And in fact, this chicken is perfectly finished with this Calvados brandy. And one of the great things about it is that you add it at the very end and just flame it, and it gives brings up a beautiful flavor to this dish.
And the aroma is amazing coming off of both of these.
Right, and the ribs, for a different reason, there's something with rum. It's got a high sugar content. We used rum in that, and we wanted to slow cook it. We didn't want anything to happen fast, and look at the beautiful result we got in that glaze, and it smells fantastic.
I can't wait to dive into those. Those look pretty good.
There are, in you know, the world's at our fingertips, and we've got some really good examples of how spirits are going to bring up the flavors in these foods.
Now, if you're interested in any of these recipes, you can log on to our website for more information. Now we're going to dive into these ribs, so we're going to head back to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Jennifer. Geez, with all this food, you're making me hungry. Well, that's about it for this edition of Spirit Basics. Join us next week when we talk about vermouth and aperitifs. For Jennifer Allan and everyone here at Spirit Basics, I'm Stephen Olson. Cheers.
Special thanks to Willow Park Wine and Spirits, whose dedication to providing knowledge, awareness, and service to their customers has made this show possible.